After watching every WWE pay-per-view from 2002 back in full, one thing became very clear. This wasn't just another year, it was a turning point. The earlier months felt uncertain, established names still dominated the main event scene, momentum stalled at times, and the company seemed caught up in being held by their past and not committing to their future. But then something shifted. New stars began to emerge, the in-ring quality improved, feuds felt more purposeful, and by the time we reached SummerSlam, it generally felt like WWE had chosen a direction. Just like last time, I've ranked and rated every single match from every pay-per-view in 2002, and those shorts are already live on the channel, so you can go and find them on the shorts page. But in this episode, we'll be breaking down the whole year properly, as this is 2002. So, starting off with the Royal Rumble, of course, we would see William Regal win the Intercontinental Championship, which I thought was awful. I became such a hater on William Regal. I wasn't a massive William Regal guy anyway, but seeing his current gimmick at this time, just made me hate him even more, so this was not good in my opinion. We saw Mr. McMahon do one of his classic quotes, which I will put up on the screen, which is, "I enjoy destroying lives. It turns me on," for his feud with Ric Flair, I believe it was. I'm trying to remember back now a few weeks. But yeah, what a quote to have during a feud, like absolutely crazy. As for the Royal Rumble match, we saw Maven eliminate The Undertaker, which was a great moment, and naturally The Undertaker beat the hell out of him afterwards, and there was a brutal chair shot afterwards, which just you could hear all around the arena. But the atmosphere around the match really changed when Steve Austin was all on his own in the ring, and then Triple H came out, and those guys beat the crap out of each other. I think as far as the winner goes, I actually would have preferred Kurt Angle getting the win here over Triple H. I feel like they could have done at WrestleMania Triple H versus Stone Cold Steve Austin in the 2 out of 3 falls match that they had at No Way Out, which we will get to. They could have then done Angle versus Jericho for the title, which I feel like would have delivered anyway, and he still could have done Rock versus Hogan, Icon versus Icon as well. But yeah, for me, Angle was by far the most deserving winner of the Royal Rumble. No Way Out, we had an interesting kind of NWO fake babyface promo. It was done well because the NWO started off the show, and it kind of reminded me of when CM Punk debuted in AEW, how they had him go out first because they know that the fans would just be chanting all night for the main part, which was, of course, the NWO debuting. Moving on to the matches, and any match involving on a pole match, I think is instantly going to be a bad one, but we saw William Regal defend the Intercontinental Championship against Edge in a brass knuckles on a pole match, and it was not great, I'm not going to lie. We saw on Raw, or like a recap, of the segment where Stephanie McMahon and Triple H renewed their wedding vows, and it was revealed that Stephanie was actually not pregnant. Triple H found out and ruined the whole thing. It was a great story. It almost would have been big enough for WrestleMania if they wanted to go that way with it, but it was fine for No Way Out, and yeah, there was one of those iconic Raw moments in 2002. So Kurt Angle beat Triple H in one of the main events of No Way Out, and that meant he would earn his Royal Rumble win as a title shot at WrestleMania, but then Kurt Angle would actually go on to face Kane at WrestleMania, so that doesn't make much sense. I know they probably explained why Angle didn't get a world title match, but yeah, I would have much preferred Kurt Angle in that position, to be fair. Or even if we'd seen Triple H versus Angle versus Jericho, I feel like would have been a great main event as well. But we got what we got. Speaking of, we move on to WrestleMania, and thank God William Regal lost the Intercontinental Championship to Rob Van Dam. And Rob Van Dam is someone who fits the bill of Intercontinental Champion so well, and he went on to have a really good run as champion as well, so I'm glad that they gave him the win here. Christian was made to look a complete fool after losing to DDP and kind of having a meltdown in the ring. I'm a massive fan of that because my investment in Christian has gone up massively since he turned heel, and if you're watching these, I'm actually starting to appreciate Christian a lot more. Kane versus Angle, as I referred to earlier, was just very random, but upon rewatch, in my opinion, I think it was the best match of the night. I know people absolutely love Rock and Hogan, and I understand why, but for me, I thought the match was kind of mediocre, but we'll get to that in just a few minutes. But for me, Angle and Kane kind of went out there knowing that they were kind of put randomly on the show, but went out there and absolutely killed it. And yeah, I really enjoyed the match. Speaking of enjoying matches, Undertaker versus Flair is a really underrated streak scale match. It was really fun, really violent, as I quite like. And yeah, I feel like it's one that people don't talk about enough as far as the streak goes. We obviously saw Stone Cold Steve Austin face Scott Hall, which just didn't at all feel like a big match. And then we get to Rock versus Hogan, which I've said I thought is a really mediocre match. On the shorts, I only gave it a 5 out of 10 because yes, the crowd is electric for it, but the crowd isn't everything as far as the match goes. The wrestling itself wasn't great. And yeah, it just felt like a slow Hulk Hogan match, which was what I expected. But yeah, I feel like people hype this up in their own heads way too much. If you look at it from a wrestling standpoint, it really is not that good. And then, yeah, we go to Chris Jericho versus Triple H, which I think was a good match. I think it gets overshadowed a lot by obviously Hogan and Rock. But yeah, it also gets a bad rep because it's like seen as a bad main event due to its position on the card. But yeah, honestly, as far as the best matches goes, I would have given it Angle versus Kane or Flair versus Taker. But overall, it really wasn't a good WrestleMania. So moving on to Backlash, and just before we saw the debut of Brock Lesnar, with Paul Heyman being a true bastard, targeting Lita to get to the Hardy Boys. We also saw the return of Eddie Guerrero, and he had his first pay-per-view match back on Backlash as well. Austin versus Taker was a awful match. It was so slow, so not in like the good methodical way. It was just really slow paced. It felt like two old men wrestling. It was not good at all. Hogan winning the WWE Championship I thought was a massive step back and an awful decision, and I feel really sorry for Triple H at that time, who did all that work to get back to the ring, only for it to be ended only a month into his WWE Championship reign. But I'm glad that the Hogan reign didn't last long either. Moving on to Judgment Day, we had Eddie Guerrero and Rob Van Dam have a really good match, and after this they would have a fantastic, probably one of the better TV matches probably of all time, in their ladder match in 2002, where they would fight for the Intercontinental Championship. And yeah, the ladder match was absolutely fantastic on Raw. I would definitely try and seek that out if you can. We also started seeing the commercials for the Get the F Out as WWF turned into WWE. We've also saw the next part of that OVW group, as we saw Deacon Batista appear with Devon Dudley on the pay-per-view as well. Edge shaved, Kurt Angle bald, but the funny thing is that Angle absolutely locks in and becomes a megastar, and probably the MVP of 2002 after getting his head shaved. So as much as it made a fool out of him, it actually was like the best decision they made. I couldn't have agreed more with The Undertaker beating Hogan to become the new WWE Champion. I was a big fan of this heel American Badass Taker, so yeah, I couldn't have been happier with this decision. Then moving on to King of the Ring, at this point Stone Cold Steve Austin had left. He pretty much said no to losing to Brock Lesnar on Raw, and then he thought that the match was more made for pay-per-view than it was a random Raw, so he quote-unquote took his ball and went home, as they said all the time on TV. But yeah, after that we saw Flair beat Eddie Guerrero, which I thought was a mistake. I thought that Guerrero should have been definitely beating Flair at this point to build Guerrero up to the main event scene, as Flair didn't need this win. But on the opposite side of that, we saw Kurt Angle tap out Hulk Hogan, which was by far the right decision. I'm glad that both of these old guys didn't get wins over younger guys. King of the Ring was probably used the best it has ever been used, as they gave a young Brock Lesnar the win to get to the next level. He was by far the correct winner, and we saw him go on to main event SummerSlam. But yeah, main event matches at this point really were struggling. I think it was SummerSlam where the big turnaround happened, but the quality of matches on the shows really weren't that good. And we also saw, on a separate note, John Cena debut on SmackDown like a couple of days after this pay-per-view. And obviously what was kind of seen as one of the kicking off points of the Ruthless Aggression era. So moving on to Vengeance, we get GMs. Stephanie McMahon is the GM for SmackDown, and Eric Bischoff is the general manager of Raw. This happened before Vengeance. Also before Vengeance, we saw the return of Shawn Michaels a few months before as part of the WWE NWO, which did disband just before Vengeance took place, but we will get to him later on. We saw a huge pay-per-view win for John Cena, who beat Chris Jericho, a former undisputed champion, only back in April. For one of his biggest wins on pay-per-view to this time. And yeah, speaking of Shawn Michaels, he would interrupt a segment with Triple H where he's deciding whether to sign for Raw or SmackDown, and he would side with Raw to reconnect and we would see the return of the short-lived DX, but it would only last like a couple of weeks before Triple H betrayed Shawn Michaels, leading to one of the best feuds of all time going into SummerSlam. I wasn't sure about The Rock winning the WWE Championship. Maybe Taker retaining here would have been better off, and doing Taker versus Lesnar at SummerSlam would have been better off. They could have had 3 matches over SummerSlam, Unforgiven and No Mercy. But, you know, it'll fine for what it was. Just not sure like why they would bring The Rock in as a transitional champion. Speaking of SummerSlam, we move on to that event where on SmackDown we saw the legendary Rey Mysterio make his debut, and he would go on to SummerSlam to have a great opener with Kurt Angle. Edge and Eddie Guerrero would have a solid match on the show as well. They turned Undertaker back to being a babyface again, as he would represent America against one of the un-Americans in Test. We also would see the return of Kane on the following night on Monday Night Raw. And speaking of, Shawn Michaels and Triple H had an absolute classic in their unsanctioned match. It was more or less the perfect match. It was maybe a few things were missing, but it was a great way to kick off their all-time feud, and probably should have been the main event of this show, but it was absolutely brilliant. And yeah, the main event was Brock Lesnar defeating The Rock to become the new WWE champion, which is a huge win for him, especially at such a young age. I'm glad he won because I hate The Rock. But yeah, it topped off probably what was the best pay-per-view of 2002 in SummerSlam. It definitely had the Brock Lesnar feel to it. You kind of see little teasers of the current day Brock Lesnar that we see now, and I did like how the fans backed Brock Lesnar more than The Rock throughout the match, as he was getting all the positive reactions. Moving on to Unforgiven, we would see the introduction of the World Heavyweight Championship on Raw, which would just be handed to Triple H, which I kind of understand he was number one contender, but maybe they could have done a tournament for it. Kane returned on TV as well, and he made his first pay-per-view appearance upon his return with a new mask and a new theme, and he would have a really fun 8-man tag team match as the opener to Unforgiven. Edge and Eddie Guerrero produced two really good matches at Unforgiven and at SummerSlam, and they had a great mid-card feud, which I don't think people talk about quite as much as they should. Flair would cost Rob Van Dam the World Heavyweight Championship, which would start off the formation of Evolution, which would also include Batista and Randy Orton, as we all know. Undertaker versus Brock Lesnar won. The first match out of their two was actually more wrestling-based, which was unexpected, with more impactful moves near the end. But honestly, the match was a lot better than I remember it being, and was actually ended up being match of the night on that show. But Unforgiven, I'd say, was the best B-level pay-per-view of the year as well. Moving on to No Mercy, Tori Wilson and Dawn Marie would start their feud off, and we'll talk about it more when we get to Armageddon. But they would have a fantastic feud to end the year of 2002. We saw the Katie Vick storyline between Kane and Triple H, which is a crazy storyline. I'm not going to go into it because it is absolutely nuts. Do look it up if you're curious about it. But yeah, quite a weird storyline to go down for just a unification match for the Intercontinental and World Heavyweight Championship. Speaking of, getting rid of the Intercontinental Championship is a stupid idea. I'm glad that they brought it back within the year, but only having one male champion on Raw is a massive mistake, and you could kind of feel the Intercontinental Championship was missing on the two pay-per-views that would follow No Mercy. But we would see the introduction of the WWE Tag Team Championships. They would have a really good tournament on SmackDown, with the finals being Edge and Rey Mysterio versus Chris Benoit and Kurt Angle, and that was a great tag team match to have on that show. And speaking of fantastic matches, the Hell in a Cell match between Brock Lesnar and The Undertaker that main evented No Mercy is one of my favourite Hell in a Cell matches of all time. Yeah, they absolutely went in on each other, and yeah, I can't say enough good stuff about that match. Going on to Survivor Series, we would see the debut of the Elimination Chamber match, but we will come back to that very shortly. There was a very, very good Elimination Tag Team match between the team of Chris Benoit and Kurt Angle, Rey Mysterio and Edge, and Los Guerreros, which is Chavo and Eddie Guerrero. Paul Heyman betrayed Brock Lesnar. I'm not sure if this was the right decision, as, you know, to me, Brock Lesnar is such a better heel. Having him as babyface at the end of the year going into the start, I thought didn't really sit quite right with me. And yeah, it just makes a lot more sense for Brock Lesnar to be a heel, and I'm glad that they turned him very soon into 2003. As for the Elimination Chamber match, it was one of the best Elimination Chamber matches we've ever had. It was a classic chamber, and it was a huge moment for Shawn Michaels to win the World Heavyweight Championship. And finally, the final pay-per-view of the year was, of course, Armageddon. And I'm glad on the show that they had the Dudleys properly reunite after coming together once again at Survivor Series. I feel like they were hugely missed throughout the year in the tag team division after the brand split. Also on the show, we had one of the more intense SmackDown rivalries continue as Dawn Marie and Tori Wilson had their segment, of which the development of their story really improved. It was all very personal. We saw it get personal within itself in probably what is seen as one of the best segments in WWE history go down, as those two would have a confrontation of sorts in a hotel room. And yeah, I'd say probably one of the biggest highlights of the night, in my opinion. Triple H and Shawn Michaels had another classic as they had the best 3 Stages of Hell match, I think, in history. I think this one was by far the best one, having the stages be a street fight, then a steel cage, then a ladder match. All of this worked really well. We know that Shawn Michaels and Triple H can put on an absolute banger when they need to. And yeah, to say that the final match on the final pay-per-view of the year was probably one of the best matches of the year overall, I think kind of says a lot as far as Triple H and Shawn Michaels go. But yeah, I absolutely love that 3 Stages of Hell match. And yeah, just a really positive way to finish off what was a very, very good final parts of the year following SummerSlam. So 2002 began as a year searching for direction. Legends were still positioned at the top, momentum felt inconsistent, and at times it felt like WWE weren't quite ready to move on from the Attitude Era. By the end of the year, that hesitation had gone, Brock Lesnar had arrived and taken control, Kurt Angle had gone into like the first prime of his career, the in-ring quality across the board had massively improved, and the company no longer felt like it was drifting, it was fully focused. SummerSlam wasn't just a great show, it was the moment where everything changed. 2002 wasn't perfect, it had its low points and it had some growing pains, but it laid the foundation for the version of WWE that would define the next few years that followed. But that's going to be it for episode 2 of the retrospective, and I'll see you next time as this journey continues into 2003.